Well, hello everyone, and you are very welcome to this edition of Writer's Block. And I am delighted to have with me Martha Bolton, who was the first woman staff writer for the great, the wonderful Bob Hope. Martha, you're very welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful that we got it all together and we are doing it.
I know. I tell you, two women who managed to get it together when fate threw a lot of things our way and thousands of miles away from each other.
Right.
We got it done. So you are traveling at the moment. Is this in connection with this wonderful book, folks, which is called Dear Bob? And it's just a wonderful compilation of letters from people who genuinely loved him, got to experience his shows, and in particular, the soldiers in the 1940s during the war who he played to. Wonderful shows who adored him and wrote to him regularly. So is this traveling to do with this particular publication?
Well, yes, we're going down to Louisiana, and they're going to be having a book signing at the World War II Museum tomorrow.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah. So we're very excited about that, and it'll be on Veterans Day. So,
couldn't be more apt.
Yeah.
Couldn't be more appropriate for Veterans Day. So you yourself, Martha, you are the recipient of the Dove Award, the WGA Award, the Golden Scroll Award, Merit for Fiction. Honestly, such incredible awards. Talk to us about your career and how it has led you to working with such great people as Bob Hope.
Well, I started writing for Bob. The way it happened was I was going to write for, I wanted to get into script writing and wanted to have a couple of spec scripts for Mama's Family, and that's what I wrote. And then, so I got it to Jean Parrott, who is the creative consultant for Mama's Family, and then the producer of Mama's Family, Ed Simmons. He really liked my work, but what happens in Hollywood a lot of the times, the show didn't get picked up. So I was very excited because I had the opportunity, but then disappointed when it didn't work out. But Jean Parrott also happened to be a writer for Bob Hope. So he suggested that I try out for him. And I wrote some jokes on a topic and got Jean got it to Bob. And then I got a call one night. It was after 11 o'clock at night. And it was Bob Hope, and he told me he loved my work. And yeah, I know. He told me he loved my work, and then he just continued to call me whenever.
Oh my gosh!
And then I ended up going on staff and became his first woman staff writer. So
that is just unbelievable, isn't it? You must have been completely bowled over by this. I mean, such an incredible.
Yeah, and when we would tape the shows, you just wanted to pinch yourself, because not only were you there as a writer for Bob Hope,
yes,
but the crowd that he ran in was all the legends and politicians all the way up to presidents. So you'd be doing these shows that just had an incredible cast list, and you'd get called in sometimes to his dressing room to bring in, and he wanted to add some jokes to the show or whatever. And so when we would write them, and then we'd go into his dressing room, and they're on he was in his makeup chair getting ready for the show, and they're on the sofa. You'd have people like Lucille Ball, George Burns, Milton Berle. I mean, like I said, all of these legends, and you're bringing in material to pitch to them, which was pretty incredible for a comedy writer.
Absolutely. And just can you give me a flavor for a moment, Martha, of what it was like for a woman writer in those days. I mean, when you got to that point where you had made that kind of breakthrough with such an icon, were you treated differently, or did you still feel that your work, that you were there on merit and that your work was what was carrying you through?
Well, absolutely. Your work was carrying you through, but also I was welcomed by the team, which was just wonderful because they were all men and they just not only welcomed me in, but they showed me the ropes, and they led me along at, if we were going to go to a meeting or go up on stage and talk with one of the guest stars, they would say, "Come on, Martha, come with us." And they just were so helpful and so encouraging. So I had a great time, and we all laughed. We had fun. At the breaks, we'd all go to dinner together. We would call each other when we were working on the show. We'd call each other and read our lines to each other, and we had such it was just encouraging, and that meant the world to a young comedy writer and a woman during that time. So
and
really
was that very much a top-down led experience? Like, did that come from Bob himself, or what was it? Did you get lucky in this?
Well, I think of course it came from Bob, as far as he set the tone for how the crew was going to operate. But also, I think each one of these comedy writers that I worked with, a lot of them were so established in the field already. So there wasn't that feeling of that threatened, they weren't threatened at all. And there was two others that came on when I came on. So we were like, the three of us were the junior writers, but we all felt that sense of welcoming, and we were all treated as though our work was just as good as anybody else's. And it came down to which ones Bob was going to pick. And so Bob was.
So is that how it worked?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Bob was the one that would pick the jokes, and he'd look at our pages and then check them off which ones he wanted to go into the show. So you really had to please him, but everybody else, there was no trying to sabotage you or trying to discourage you, or they were very welcoming. And the ones that are still with us, we still communicate today. We're very good friends.
And did you, so you would have a writers' meeting, and you would and he would come into that meeting and he would work through.
Right. At the shows, this is for the shows, we would meet at his house, and he had this large office area, and we'd sit around this large table and we'd pitch ideas for like the sketches, what they would be for the show. We'd talk down the show to, what that was going to all be about. And then there was a lot of goofing off, and the other writers, especially those that had been with him from radio or had been there for a long time, they would get into a little competition of wits with Bob, and Bob always won.
This is something that I noticed in the book. There did seem to be this emphasis on him having this very sponge-like brain, this ability to remember material and jokes.
It was fascinating. He could call you up, and if he wanted to try to remember a joke from 10 years ago at some event, he would say, I want to get that joke right. So it was at this event, it was at this time, and this is what the joke said. And he usually had it right anyway, but I think he had a photographic memory, and he would, if we had new jokes, if something had just happened in the news and we had new jokes that we had to write, we'd hand them to him. He'd look at them, glance down and read them, and then walk out on stage and do them exactly.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you look at the tapes from World War II, that's him. They used to call him Rapid Robert, and it's joke after joke, and it's very fast. And the same thing happened back then. That if when they got to where they were going, they would get new information about what the local hangout was, or what the complaints of the soldiers were, or whatever. And then they'd write new material, and they'd tell him, they'd give it to him. And then when he walked down on stage, he didn't have the notes for these monologues. He would just quote them. And a lot of times, like I said, it was just handed to him moments before.
You would wonder about what goes on in their brains, because I mean, I come from a performing family, and one of my uncles he was actually my granduncle. He was my mother's uncle. But he lived a long time, but he was one of Ireland's most famous comedians, Val Fitzpatrick. And when you'd go to his house, which was a totally showbiz house, full of costumes, full of everything, but you'd look at his archive, his books of jokes, and everything was really well archived. And every joke that he'd ever written was filed away, but really, really well archived. And I remember seeing, you would know about Bob Monkhouse. And Bob Monkhouse, I'd heard, I don't know, is it true that Bob Monkhouse actually wrote for Bob Hope at one stage as well?
There's a list of the writers during World War II that's in the book. And then over the years, they've got the whole list, and there's like 100. And it does sound familiar, his name. So I'm sure.
He was a very famous British comedian.
Okay.
They said that he wrote, it's hard to know whether that's true or not, but I couldn't see a reference to it in the book. That's why I was wondering. But also you look at his archive, and it's meticulous. The books, they're like journals and volumes, and every joke was important. Every joke got logged and recorded.
Oh, absolutely. And really, it's a history lesson a lot of times, these jokes, because it takes you to those times and whatever was going on in the news.
And what was politically correct and what wasn't politically correct.
Right. And it's their, that's their history book. And in fact, Linda wrote a book with, Bob's career, the joke, through the jokes of what his had each joke took you on a historical journey. So through his life.
So just take us now to Linda Hope. At what stage did you meet Linda in your early experience of working with Bob?
Well, she was a producer on the show, so we were connected in that way. So so we would work with her, and then she eventually just became the only producer. There for a while, there was others that would come in, but toward the end of his life, she became, the main producer. And so she grew up with these World War II letters, and even had, did a school paper on them, because she was wanted to see what they were, had talked with the secretary at the time, Marjorie Hughes, and asked, what are in those boxes, because they were all filed away in these boxes.
Yes, I'll put up some overlays of the photographs you're talking about for people, because it'll be easier for them to see them up close, rather than put them behind me here on the display. But they were just boxes and boxes, and you show in the book the Library of Congress and the wall lined with all of these boxes, and that's only a few of them.
Oh, I know. And we started working on the book when the boxes were at his house. And this was back when Bob was alive. She grew up with the letters, and I had the opportunity to do some work with the letters. And so I discovered what all was in them and the historical significance, plus the peek into Bob's heart, which I was just fascinated with. So I asked Bob if he had ever thought about putting them together in a book, and he was very interested. but he said, I don't think I can go through them again. You know, it was just so close to his heart, brought back so many memories. And so he said,
I can imagine how that must have been, because I mean, there's that beautiful letter in the book from a GI who writes to him and says, you know, I'm sure you won't remember this, but you know, I was in the dispensary and you sat with me, and he'd been injured in the chest, and he said, you know, you got me a drink, and he said it meant so much to me.
Yeah.
And the letter back from Bob was just phenomenal.
Oh yeah, and not just for that one. They would get, if a soldier got a letter, the others would all follow him back to his tent, or if he was at the hospital, the letter would get passed around. So one letter did such good for all of them, because you know, it was Bob Hope and he was wishing them well. Even if he was wishing the one soldier well, they took it that he was wishing them all well. And
yes,
and a lot of times that's exactly what he was doing. You know, he would address it to the whole group, you know.
And this incredible, I mean, you've got all of these great people that he got together, but also just getting on an aircraft, stripped out seats when war broke out, stripped out seats, you know, stale lunch boxes, and prepared to get up there and perform, even if they start being shelled. And that was the extraordinary thing in the book that you brought home, and that these letters brought home, was the fact that they deliberately put themselves at risk. Exactly.
All the time, every engagement, he was ducking the same incoming as the soldiers were, and he couldn't wait to go back and be there with them again. No matter what happened on the last trip, he still would go back. And to me, it seems like he made a commitment. Somewhere along the line, he loved the audience, because the audience was so receptive. He loved the laughter. He loved bringing the laughter to them. But somewhere along the line, I think when he was visiting the hospitals and seeing these kids, and not only that, but just seeing the audience of these, you know, 18, 19-year-old kids, knowing that the next battle, a lot of them wouldn't be there.
Wouldn't be there. That's it. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it got inside him, and he was just determined that he was going to be there for every engagement in his lifetime. I don't, you know, Roosevelt suggested that he do this. Bob wanted to enlist, and Roosevelt said that his talents were better utilized, you know, improving the morale of the troops. And Bob agreed to do it. But I don't think President Roosevelt knew what he was getting when he asked Bob that. I think he was thinking World War II, and Bob took it to a whole new level and went through every war, being there for the troops. And in peacetime, it didn't stop when there was no war. He was still a champion of the veterans.
Yes, that's right, because this went on for 50 years, didn't it? I mean, traveling out to visit soldiers in the most austere parts of the world.
His last military show was when he was 87 years old.
Oh,
and he's climbing in and out of helicopters and stepping onto stages and, you know, putting himself in harm's way, ducking the same incoming again. And, you know, when you think about people that you know that are that age, it takes a special person to be doing that. And he did it. He didn't think twice. He was, if they needed him, he was there. And he got his friends to go along with him, and they were out there putting on shows again and again and again.
And did any of your jokes make it into those shows? I know they made it onto the TV shows, but did they make it into those shows?
Well, sure. And we would get calls from the road wherever he was at, and then, you know, especially if something happened there, and then that would be the new topic of whatever it was that he wanted us to write about. There was some new thing, and he'd give us pretty good ideas of where to go with the different topics. And so you felt like you were there with him because he was so descriptive of what to talk about. And then he'd get up on stage and, like I said, with no notes, and just get up there and start talking like he knew all of these guys personally. He really drove it home.
Yes.
They were family. They were his family.
Yes. And there was no arrogance to his act.
None at all. And even during the shows, when you saw him in the dressing room, it was the same man that walked onto stage. And when he was done, it was the same man that walked off. It was
really,
that was who he was.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah.
There were also a couple of other comedians of the same sort of era. I think Eric Morecambe and Wise in the United Kingdom, exactly the same. They were the same off stage as they were on, but it's a rare thing.
It is. And he loved what he did. That's, real proof of finding a job that you love, because he would come home from a overseas tour of some sort and putting on a show overseas, and the plane had barely got on the ground, and as soon as he could, he would call you up and say, let's start talking about the next show. He never stopped. It was just, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do next? And he loved what he did.
And do you feel, Martha, having known him, that he had to work on his style, or did it flow very naturally? Did this humor, this clever, quick mind, which packaged together delivered this act, was it natural or was it worked on?
Well, I think a little bit of both, because he honed a lot of it during vaudeville, and little by little he started. You see what jokes work, and you see what style, and the audience kind of tells you what your persona is going to be. And his, we wrote to it, but it was who he was, and that was a lot of his character. It just grew out of who he really was. Yes. And he just loved to have fun, loved to perfect it, loved to read the jokes and get as many as he could. And then it's all in the picking of the jokes too. You don't pick something that's not you. So he would be very selective of what he picked so that it went along with his persona, and that, it made him laugh. So he was pretty sure the audience would laugh. So I think it was deliberate, that it was practice. And it was also planned out to make sure that he got this persona the way he wanted it. But a lot of it was really him.
And do you feel, in your experience working with him, was he open to change? I mean, he would have been open. Of course, he would have to have been open to scenarios because, things appear in the media and you've got to make jokes about those. But was he open to change in other ways?
Well, yeah, he was. We were a team, and he would love to talk about like the sketch ideas, and then he'd listen to each one of our variations of it, or we would turn in different variations of it, and then he would play with it. He'd take, a block of this person's sketch and then a block of this person's, and then he'd put it together, and if we had suggestions after that, to improve it again, he'd be happy to put it in. If he liked it, but his goal was to have the best sketch or the best monologue, the best talk spot that he would have with the guest stars. He wanted the best he could get. And so he would either push us, or he'd be very open to improving it along the way.
Well, was he demanding, or was it simply because he had very high standards that you felt you produced?
He wasn't demanding, but his schedule was.
Yes.
He kept an incredible schedule and would call it at all hours of the day or night, because he would be in a different time zone. So it would be 7 o'clock at night where he was at, but it could be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning where you're at. So,
yes.
Yeah, if you got a late night phone call, it was definitely Bob. And So that was fun. And then it's the fast writing. He was always wanting it, whatever was up to the minute. So if something broke in the news, even if he was just getting ready to go onto stage, he'd call us up and he'd want all material for whatever that was. There was one story that he was going to a psychiatrist convention. So we all wrote psychiatry jokes. And when Bob got to the venue, he discovered that it wasn't a psychiatrist convention, it was a chiropractor's convention. So we had about 15 or 20 minutes to write all new material for where he really was supposed to be.
Oh my God. What do you feel makes Bob Hope still relevant today?
I think what made him relevant all the way through his career was he kept up on the times. Whatever was breaking in the news, he wanted to be on top of it. Whatever the trends were, he would have guest stars on his show, not only the legends, but he would also have the young upcoming stars of the day. So he always kept himself relevant.
Yes.
Now, today, I think it is that people had such high regard for him with what he did with the military, and especially the military. And they held him in such high regard. And the greatest generation definitely, held him in high regard. So I think that's a large part of the popularity of this book, is that they, letter after letter, and now communication after communication, where they are so grateful that this book is out and giving him the credit that he was due, and also giving the GIs back then how much we owe our freedom, and what they did, and so sacrificially for the world.
Yes. Yeah, and it is he was part of the great generation too, probably the greatest generation. And when he eventually passed, I mean, how did that impact on you? I mean, as a professional who'd worked with him, as a writer who knew the rhythm patterns, who knew his voice, his intonation, it must have been very difficult for you, Martha.
It was. I mean, we knew it was coming. He was 100, but you just didn't want to lose him. He was such an icon and such a friend, and he just brought joy into the room. Whenever you worked with him, he'd walk in, and there was such joy that you missed that. And we just had a book signing in LA at the Hollywood Museum, and so many of his friends were there, and just everybody remembering him and the stories that everybody shared. It was just, and I talk with the other writers, we all miss him. He just had such a presence, and he was so important to all of our lives. And I miss all the other the writers that have passed on as well. They made such an impact on my life, and Bob, I owe him so much for giving me the opportunity to write for him. And we all feel that way, that he just was such an instrument of where our careers went. It just is amazing what this man did for so many people. We're not the only ones, but he helped so many people and encouraged the world. Brought hope wherever he went. He brought hope.
Well, this is it. This is exactly what he did. And as you say, he was so loved. But what I noticed about the jokes is that nothing really dated, even though, as you say, he kept relevant and he kept up to speed and kept everything fresh. It was that delivery, that punchline at the end. You must have got to learn very, very quickly how his style worked and what to stay away from.
Right. And he did a lot of self-deprecating humor, which always works if you put it on yourself. And his, like you say, his delivery was just impeccable. And he would know, and he was like a little kid that way. He would know that he had a line coming up, and he would just lead the audience along, and he knew what that punchline was going to be and that it would get a great response. And he just had fun with it. He had fun with the material. He loved the material. And
yeah,
you know,
and I mean, he was so trustworthy as well, because he appealed to the families, but he could also I'm sure, kind of go to the wire with the soldiers as well, you know. And yet at the same time, he was what was it, 19 Oscar ceremonies he hosted.
Yes, he holds the record. He holds the record.
Who gets asked 19 times?
Someone who's doing someone who's doing it right. You know,
someone is doing it right. And what did I read it correctly? 5 honorary Oscars?
Yeah.
Who gets 5 honorary Oscars these days?
I know. And so many, he rose to the top of every level of show business.
Yes.
And he was a major star before he even started going to the troops. You know, it wasn't like he went to them to get any photo op or notoriety for that. He just went because he wanted to give back. And the troops were so close to his heart. And he made that his mission, that he was going to give back his whole life. At different tapings, when we would tape the show, after the whole weekend or 2 or 3 days of taping, and he would be exhausted, and he's in his 80s and 90s, and he would, the show would get taped, and then he would invite the audience to stay if they wanted, and then he would go, record message after message for, charitable organizations and different needs and causes. And he would stay there, this, older man, and it's way past, the normal bedtime for most of us. And he'd stay there and go through all of these causes, giving them what they needed to raise money or raise awareness. He was just a giver.
Yes. And it marks people. It does mark him as someone special, because I know, as a singer, I know what it's like to go to a charity event and you see very famous people come in and they get up, they do their 1 song, 2 songs, 3 songs, and leave to applause. But the ones who stay behind, they're the ones you remember.
Yeah.
They're the ones who get invited back.
Yeah.
And they mark themselves out as being a totally different artist.
Yeah, exactly. He believed in that. If there was anything he could do for you, anything at all, he would do it.
He would do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's wonderful. Just to get back to you for a moment and your writing. What's coming up now in 2022 for you?
Well, I've been writing musicals, the script for musicals, and so we have those playing throughout the year at different locations in Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Florida. And so I'm continually working on those. And then also, there are a couple of other books that I'm in the middle of writing, so I'm hoping that one of those might come out in 22. And
are these memoirs or are they fiction?
Well, I have written 2 fiction books, and I might write another one. They are I do mostly nonfiction, but I am right now, the ones I'm working on now are nonfiction, but I would like to do a couple more fiction books, just kind of letting the ideas sit in my brain.
The musicals that you mentioned there, are they reworkings of existing musicals, or are they new modern musicals?
No, they're original. They're all original. Yes. Yeah. So it keeps me busy. I enjoy it, and it's you just, that's one thing he taught us, is that work ethic of just, you just keep going, he went to 100. So
absolutely. Well, Martha Bolton, I've been so delighted to talk to you. I'm so glad that we found each other. We had a power outage, folks, and Martha has very, very kindly hung on, and we were able to do this interview. And just remind us of where you are exactly now. Are you in Los Angeles, or are you traveling?
Well, no, right now I'm in Tennessee.
You're in Tennessee?
Yeah, and we'll be in New Orleans. And last week I was in LA. We had a book signing there at the Hollywood Museum. So that was
such a
fun.
fantastic museum.
Oh, it is. And right now they've got the lobby is all dedicated to Bob Hope. So it's really something.
Fabulous.
Headed to the World War II Museum is next.
Well, that's going for Veterans. Will you be there on Veterans Day?
Yes.
Well, this is fantastic. Martha, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everybody, the book is called Dear Bob. It's been co-authored with, hang on, let me just get that straight. Has Linda Hope just written the foreword on this, or were you the main writer, Martha?
Well, the main writer, but we work together. So it's Martha Bolton with Linda Hope, and she was so instrumental in like when we were working on the manuscript. I do some writing, I'd send it to her, and then she'd make suggestions and send it back. So we went back and forth, and also in the selection of the letters, it was, as you can imagine, it was an overwhelming job because there were so many thousands of letters to go through. And that was the hardest part for both of us, was selecting which letters would go in.
Yes, because when I was reading the book, I did feel I was listening to one voice, which I presumed was yours. But then authors are very good at melding voices, collaborative voices together. And right. I can imagine how long the research must have taken. Did you have to go to the Library of Congress yourself and actually work through?
Yes. Yeah. We started when Bob was alive working on the book. So I was writing it back in California. And then several years ago, she contacted me and said, do you want to, get back on the book and finish it up? So I started then, and by then the letters were at the Library of Congress, and then I went up there to finish the research and finish the book.
Well, Martha, I am so delighted that you managed to come on the show today and that we were able to make contact and discuss this wonderful man who brought us so much joy in our lives. And I'm so delighted that you came on, and I appreciate every moment that you've given us today. And I wish you lots of energy as you promote him and celebrate him and remind us of the genius of Bob Hope.
Well, thank you for having me on, and it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. Everybody, we will see you again next week. This is Writer's Block, and our guest today was the wonderful Martha Bolton.